Welcome to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast. Welcome to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast, and it is another Hall of Fame episode for you listeners. So we've done 2 Hall of Fame episodes so far, Ginny Elliott and Bruce Davidson. If you haven't listened, you can go back and listen to both of them. But this show, I am so unbelievably excited about. My inner fangirl, Catherine Austin, is with me. Catherine, you are going to have to keep me under control.
I can tell.
Sum up our guest, because she is a legend of the sport of eventing and somebody that I know both of us have followed her career throughout.
So this person is not only has achieved a great deal in eventing over a number of years and continues to ride, but is also one of the most popular people in the sport, probably of all time. She's always smiling. She's very popular. I think she takes a great photo. So she's been on the cover of Horse and Hound a great many times. And it'll be really fun to talk to her.
Oh, well, let's introduce her. Welcome to the show, Mary King.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me.
Oh, we could not be more delighted. You have been world number 1. You have been British champion, I think 4 times. You've won, I think 4 5-stars. The list goes on. We're going to talk about some of the highlights of your career, but can we go right back to the beginning and how you started? Because you weren't born into a particularly horsey family.
No, not at all. Neither of my parents had any connection with horses, and I just had this sort of, I think as many young girls do, have this sort of love of horses or ponies, and wanted to sort of ride, but it all seemed a bit impossible. And my father had been in the Royal Navy when my mother married him. And sadly, soon after they had been married, he had a severe motorcycle accident and had a very bad head injury, which he was then invalided out of the Navy, which at this time I had been conceived, but I wasn't born. And he was very poorly for a long time, but eventually came out of hospital. And so I never knew my father before his accident, and he was a changed character because of his severe head injury. Luckily, he'd married somebody like my dear mum, who was just so sort of calm and accepting of, whatever happens in life. And anyway, because there she was left with her husband, who was very difficult to manage initially, and 2 young children, because my brother Simon had been born before his accident, and then I was born while he was still sort of in hospital. Anyway, eventually when he became well enough, which took a number of years, he managed to do a little bit of work, which was a job came up down in Devon, which is where I still am now. And it was a verger of a village church, so looking after the church, and with the job came a rent-free cottage. So that, for Mum, was just an absolute godsend that, that this position came up. Dad was able to do, the verger's duties, which, weren't too onerous. And there was a cottage that went with the job. And so anyway, that's how we came to live in this little village of Falcon Regis in Devon. And the vicar had a pony. So that's really where it all began. Yeah.
So how did it go from sort of riding the vicar's pony to thinking, do you know what, this is something that I want to do as a career? Did you know that was what you wanted to do as a career?
Well, I didn't. We didn't even have television when I was growing up, because my father was quite strange, sort of strange in his. He used to have a lot of epileptic fits. He became very, as I gather, people who've had bad head injuries, became very, had to do things at exactly the same time every day. He had a routine through the day that he didn't like being changed. And he didn't want television in the house because he knew he would end up just sitting watching it all the time. and he didn't want that. So I was sort of a bit sort of ignorant about most things, including eventing. I didn't know what eventing was. Except I remember I used to go down the road to the farm down the road when, in the good old days when Horse of the Year show was on at Wembley. And I used to go down. It was so exciting. It was in those days, it was prime time, television time. They showed Wembley and watching all, Harvey Smith and Eddie Macken and all that sort of, that's my first real, I suppose, connection to top level equestrianism, was watching that on the neighbours' television. But as far as eventing, that didn't really come into my sort of knowledge until, well, I joined the local pony club. They were very, very non-competitive pony club, the Axvale, and I joined, when I didn't have my own pony, but used to take the vicar's pony to things I could ride to when the rallies were near enough to ride to, because I didn't have any transport. And plus they had other dismounted things, which my mum would drive me to and that sort of thing. Anyway, and it was the Pony Club coach trip to Badminton Horse Trials, which, I signed up for. Mummy, can we go? And I didn't really know where we were going to, except it was some horsey event, competition. So it was then, and I was about 10 or 11 years old at this stage, went on this coach trip and was just absolutely in awe at Badminton. I remember walking around and I still remember being there and just being absolutely in awe of these, riders who seemed so brave, and all these beautiful looking horses, shiny horses, shiny horses. Everybody seemed so rich, and it just seemed just such an amazing world. And how could they gallop at these fences that seemed impossible to jump? So, it was that's sort of what I sort of came away with from badminton, thinking, this is just fantastic. I would love to be able to do this, but it seemed so impossible that I would ever be able to do anything like that. But that was it. From then on, that was my sort of, when anybody asked me, what do you want to do when you're older? I'd say, I want to be an event rider and ride at badminton. But, I sort of inside thought, but that's never going to happen, surely. But it gave me something to aim for. And I've always been one right through my life to have aims and ambitions, things to go for in the future.
Mary, before we jump forward to actually you riding at your first badminton, you worked for Sheila Wilcox, didn't you? And I guess she must have played a considerable part in educating you about the realities of eventing and helping you on your journey. What was that like?
Yes, oh gosh, she certainly did. She was a huge part of my career. I left school. I sort of rode Vickers pony, and then as I got a bit better at riding other people's ponies, and then eventually, I always wanted one of my own. Eventually, when I was 13, Mum and Dad realised it wasn't just a sort of passing phase. I was so keen that my grandpa died and left a bit of money in his will. And so we went out and found a pony, and so that then the local farmer let me use a field, and the vicar let me use a stable. So, managed to sort of get by. And that pony, luckily, he was only young. He was just 5 years old. So it was me as sort of not really knowing what I was doing and a young pony. But luckily, with, numbers of ups and downs, we got going together. And, were quite successful doing the sort of pony club eventing and pony club show jumping teams and all that sort of thing. So anyway, but I knew, the great times I was having with him, I knew I wanted to, as soon as I left school, go off and work for somebody. And then I was told about Sheila Wilcox. I didn't really know who she was, didn't appreciate how brilliant she'd been in her day. But a friend who was very horsey, her mum was very knowledgeable, and she said, you ought to go and work for Sheila Wilcox. So I didn't know who she was, but I wrote her a letter saying, explaining, and got a letter back saying to come for an interview. So I went, when I was, went to this interview, and I think in her eyes, she saw this young, ignorant girl who was very, very keen. And that she had herself, she'd been amazing in her time she evented, but she had a bad fall, broken her back, was unable to compete anymore, still could ride, even though she had one leg that didn't really work very well, but she was still very efficient on a horse. And I think she felt that maybe she could, through me, carry on her eventing career. I think that's in the back of her mind. She thought she could model me into, a good enough rider to go on and, continue her career, sort of thing. So anyway, I was all up for it. So I left school when I was 16, which you could in those days. Perfect. So much of a teacher's horror, because I was fairly, okay at school. I did quite well, in my O levels, as we did in those days, but had no intention of staying on for A levels, and they all thought I was mad. But luckily, that's where my father, let my mum take charge in a way, and mum was very supportive. She just let me sort of do my, follow my dreams. So off I went, built my pony. Had, funny how, as much as I adored him, I had no qualms about selling him, because I knew I needed to sell him. I couldn't go off and work for Sheila and have a pony at home because there was nobody to look after him. So I sold him, went to the Pony Club Championships at Stoneleigh, and then sold him straight after. And then off I went to work for Sheila, and I thought I was quite good. I remember arriving there, and lucky for me, although not so lucky for Sheila's head girl, the day before I arrived, a horse had come over backwards with her head girl, and so that the girl had been squashed and had her pelvis broken and was in hospital. So I arrived, and she was short of a rider, which for me was a huge opportunity. I think I wouldn't have been riding for months and months. I've been mucking out and grooming for ages before I was allowed to sit on a horse, except this had happened and she was short of a rider. So, so I started, and I thought I was quite good. Had great success with my pony, had, won quite a bit and this and that, and I went there thinking I was good. And I remember being brought right back down to earth with her. It took me a whole week to learn to ride a 20-metre circle at trot to how she wanted it, and that really brought me back down to earth. I realised I had a huge amount to learn.
I can imagine. Talk to us about Divers Rock. When did he come to you? He was your first 5-star horse. When did he come to you? Was that while you were at Sheila's?
Yes, no, it was. I spent 2.5 years at Sheila's, and as I say, I feel that for me, I built a huge, a wide base of knowledge for me to then build my career on, which I do feel often for young riders. Maybe that's why you see a lot of young riders who, look amazing, but they don't seem to be able to keep going up to the very top level, as though their base of knowledge isn't broad enough and they reach the peak of their ability before they get up to a higher level, if you get what I'm trying to say. Whereas I feel for me, at the time at Sheila's, I learned so much about riding. She bought and sold horses, and I learned all about producing young horses, stickability. She bought a lot of horses from sales that were very, very tricky, had real behaviour problems. That's why they'd been sent to the sales. And I was the one who was given the leg up with my back protector on, the skull cap, and see what happens, sort of thing. And so, I rode many, many horses in those 2.5 years. And I had many falls, but for some reason didn't seem to lose my confidence, and learned how to produce horses, get this horse that was using all its energy against me to, it's gaining its trust and getting to understand, so it used its energy to work with me rather than against me. And so that, all the riding thing and how particular she was for riding the dressage, and also then all the stable management was such a high standard of stable management. I don't do things as well as we did in those, for her. And just everything, feeding, everything. It was a huge learning curve for me. So when I came away from Sheila's, I desperately wanted to progress. I wasn't good enough rider I did a bit of competing with her, but I wasn't quite good enough in her eyes to go on. So she would get Captain Mark Phillips, Richard Walker, those sort of riders to event the horses that were at competition level. But that was all good learning for me, watching those riders ride the horses I'd been producing. But anyway, that's why I left, and I want to progress. I want to try and compete myself. And then it was, Divers Rock came along. I found one horse initially because I had very little money to start with. I had the money I'd sold my pony with, which was £1,500. And I initially found a horse at Clarissa Bleakman's yard, Clarissa Strawn, as she was then. And she had a horse in to sell, and it was £1,200, this scatty 5-year-old thoroughbred horse. But, it was nice. It had good paces. Its jumping technique, although it was untrained, was there. So I bought it, produced it for 3 months, and sold it for £3,000. And that for me was great. I could, with what I'd learned from Sheila's, I could put into, and make money. So that's what I did initially, did a bit of that. And then, looked for a horse and came. Divers Rock was advertised in the Horse and Hound. And I went to see him. He'd been an ex-top show horse, had been to Wembley as a show horse, show hunter. He'd gone on and done pure dressage at Jenny Lauriston Clark's, but wasn't good enough to do the Piaffe and Passage. He just didn't have the ability or mind to do it. So somebody had tried to jump him and hadn't got on very well. So I managed to buy him for £3,000, I remember. And I couldn't believe I was buying him. He was beautiful because he'd been a top show horse. And I remember trying to jump him when I went to try him, and he just crashed through this Cavaletti. And I thought, oh dear, sort of work needed here. But he was affordable for me at the time, and he was a beautiful horse. And, it just took a lot of quiet training at home. And, I had the knowledge to know what to be doing with him. And once he started eventing, he was a natural cross-country horse. He was very, very brave. And although I was a novice rider, he always wanted to get to the other side of the fence. And I was good on the flat, fairly good dressage rider in those days. But my show jumping was not very good. But anyway, we went on up through the grades, and yes, he was the first one to get to badminton on. And, I couldn't believe it that first time I was driving into badminton and being at this event that I dreamt of as a child and thinking I'd never get there, really. And there I was, getting there. So
and did it overawe you? I mean, or did you sort of relish being there and tackling the challenge, or did you think, oh my God, I'm actually here?
No, I really relished it. I remember people saying, "You're really nervous," and I said, "No, I'm just so excited." It was that I was, I think quite lucky. I had that frame of mind, rather than being scared stiff. And actually, funnily enough, you saying the two people who've done this Hall of Fame podcast already, Bruce Davison and Ginny Leng, were so instrumental into my first badminton, because I arrived there and it was sort of there and doing, and then Bruce Davison knew I was a sort of first timer, young thing, and he was so helpful. I remember for the cross country, how he said, "Mary," he said, "this is an event like no other." He said, "You must not think at all backwards across country, attack and ride forward every fence," which, I mean, especially in those days where you didn't have such technical fences, that's really, what you did. So many riders became a bit overawed, and the horses were a bit overawed because they've never seen anything quite so big before. But, that's what caused the cross country faults. Whereas, that's Bruce telling me to ride on made me think, come on, keep going forward. And I mean, Divers Rock was a brave horse anyway. And Ginny and Lucinda were my heroines, at the time as I was growing up, followed their every move. And, seeing Ginny there and sort of watching what she was doing, and Lucinda. And I remember on the last day at badminton, Lucinda came up to me, and I couldn't believe that Lucinda Pryor Palmer, as she was in those days, was actually walking towards me and going to, I thought, shoot, she's going to actually speak to me. And I was in the collecting ring of the show jumping, and she came up to me and she said, "Well done, Frances. Your cross-country round was fantastic yesterday." And I thought, I don't care that she's called me by the wrong name. The fact she's just spoken to me is just so wonderful. And yeah, I mean, I know her. We got to know her very well and tease her about that often these days.
You can go as Frances. If Lucinda says it, then...
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's just the fact she's talking to me. Yeah, so yeah, somehow managed to come. It was 7th at my first badminton, which was purely because Divers Rock was such a naturally good, brave cross-country horse, but clever as well. Because if I watched the tape video of me then, I was quite a passenger, really. I mean, I kicked on bravely, but I wasn't particularly accurate. And, he was a good boy and looked after me. So, and it was big that year. There's really big fences that year. I do, even though now it's more technical, they were whopping. You had this huge, great footbridge fence and the great big, badminton drop where you jumped down and had to bounce over these huge sets of rails. It definitely was a massive year, and it showed because, there were very few clear rounds, and that's why luckily I managed to go clear and do all right.
Mary, when did you first ride on a championship team?
Right, that was because it was 1985. I first rode at badminton, and managed to come 7th. Got this letter from the selectors. I remember in the collecting ring, I was handed this envelope and opened it, and it said, "We would like to put you on the long list for the European Championships." And I was already in cloud 9, and this letter was just absolutely incredible. But Divers Rock was slightly unlevel after badminton, and we couldn't, it went persisted, and anyway, the long and short of it, after investigation, he had advanced navicular disease, so he never actually competed again. So that was, that was one of the first many highs and lows that I got in eventing. I realised that's what it's so like, the eventing. You have your amazing times and things can go wrong so easily. So that was the end. Divers Rock. We tried with Sue Dyson from the Animal Health Trust, and my vet here in Devon knew Sue, and she was very helpful with Divers Rock. We tried to get him back on the road, but anyway, we couldn't. It was too far gone. A lot to do, something to do with my ignorance as far as using a very basic local farrier that wasn't very good, but he was cheap. And of course, that led to lots of damage maybe. So anyway, you sort of learn, you should do things better. But anyway, so that was the end of that chance of riding as a championship. And then it was later, it was in 1991, so 6 years after that, I'd been lucky enough to find King William as a young horse. And he, again, was a naturally brilliant cross-country horse. And I was getting a bit more knowledgeable. And I went on and I won badminton. And actually, the year I went to the Europeans, that's right, I went to my first badminton with King William in the spring of 1991, and he was only 8 years old, which is quite amazing to think this now. Mm-hmm. He was 8 years old, and it was a long format, games, routes and tracks and steeplechase. But he was a tough horse and although he's big, he was light on his feet. And anyway, so I went to badminton on this 8-year-old, and it had such an unfortunate thing happen. It was going clockwise, so we went through Huntsman's Close first early on in the course. It was absolutely teeming with rain, slippery, and I jumped through Hunson's Cliffs, and you had to turn quite sharply to the big trachina just there. I don't know if you remember in the olden days, it was always there. And I came round the corner, and he skidded and slapped down on his side, even though we were well studded up and in control, but he slipped over and fell. And in those days, it was nothing to do with the fence, but in those days you have the penalty zones. And because the fence is jumping out of Hunson's Close, and then the trachina were close enough that the penalty zones overlapped. So in fact, I fell in the penalty zone because he got up and somebody ran from the crowd, gave me a leg up, and I literally from there kicked, and we just cantered on and jumped this huge trachina and carried on. And so I think he then carried on, and I had an amazing ride with him. Despite the bad conditions, he just galloped around. And I think even though we'd had our fall, the selectors were well impressed. So that's how I then got to my first. It was then that autumn I went to Punchestown European Championships 1991. So yeah, that was my first time I'd ridden on the team.
How was that feeling? Your first championship, Mary? Obviously, you'd had the heartbreak of Divers Rock, got back up to top level. How was the sort of the selection going to that Europeans in Punchestown?
Yes, well, it was, one of my ambitions was to try and ride in the British team and to get that coveted Union Jack that you get to sew onto your show jumping jacket. That, when you ride for a team, you have your Union Jack and that's it. Nobody can take it away from you then. You have it for life. So it's something that, I think all young riders, would love to get, is that Union Jack. And I remember I didn't literally sew it on until just before, until dressage morning in case something went wrong. But it was just, the team training. We used to train at Badminton, so to be there for the team training leading up to the championships was just wonderful. There was Ian Stark and Ginny Leng, although sadly her horse, I think it was Master Craftsman, was lame, so she didn't get to go, which was very sad. But anyway, she was there in the training, and there was Richard Walker, Karen Dixon, Katie Meacham, and myself. So, and there's a couple of reserves. So, just being at training with those top riders and eating with them and training with them was just such a great time. Then going out to the championships, and then did my dressage. And I was in the lead, so I led the dressage at those Europeans, and galloped off across country. King William was still only 8 years old. He was naively brave, as I was. And so we galloped off happily round this course, and it was all just amazing until second to last fence was the water, and there was a big sheer drop. I mean, it was quite, you wouldn't do this sort of fence these days because it was a really big drop down, complete, just literally step down into water, right down. Then you have to canter on, and it was 3 or 4 strides, and you have to jump up onto an island under a sort of roof, and then jump back into water and then out. And anyway, it was a very complicated fence. But there was an alternative going in because it was quite extraordinarily big drop down into water. And a lot of riders went the long way because we used to ride a bit to team orders, or we did in those days, and were told what to do. The earlier riders went the long way, and they said to me, because I think the other riders had gone well or something, I can't remember. Anyway, they said I could, if I wanted to, I could go direct because they knew how brave William was. They said, you must keep coming to the edge, don't go steady, keep riding him to the edge. Well, that was a bit of misinformation because I thought, right, yep, I'm going to go straight, that's fine. And I kept cantering to this huge step down, cantering, and he literally cantered over the edge. He didn't have time to look at what I should have. In hindsight, I should have come back to trot. I should have trotted on a soft terrain, let him look forward, see the drop down, and he would have still, because he was so brave, he would have gone on and jumped on down, but he cantered over the edge, fell in this huge drop. I don't know how far it was, down, but anyway, he fell down into the water and I went down with him. He galloped off, but then luckily came back to me and I was given a leg up, but I'd really torn my knee ligament. But anyway, I managed to get back on and finish the course. But my knee swelled right up. I couldn't ride and I couldn't show jump the next day. But the other 3 team members did brilliantly, and we still, as a team, won gold. So that was my first gold medal, was by falling off and getting eliminated and being the discard score. Well, no, I wasn't. Yes, I wasn't in there, I suppose. But anyway.
He went from your first Europeans, he went then to badminton the following year as a 9-year-old and gave you your first 5-star victory.
He did, yeah, that's right. Yes, luckily, he wasn't put off and wasn't injured by what had happened. And yeah, he was just in great form. It was an amazing cross-country ride I had with him, and yeah, all good. And I somehow only had 1 show jump down, which I had a show jump in hand on the final day over Ginny. And I remember Ginny jumped clear, and I think, she thought she'd won. And I thought maybe she might have as well, but went in and I think we touched every fence, but only 1 came down, and that was it. So.
Tell us about King William, because he was known for being so exceptionally brave in the cross country, as you've already said, but he was liable to have a pole down on the final day, and it was almost the sort of a learning curve in itself, wasn't it? Because he gave you those real tastes of 5-star success, your first championship, but also what it was like to lose a 5-star on the final day.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure, show jumping wasn't helped by my riding, but saying that, he was a funny horse because he was quite a sharp, nervy horse. That's why at the bets and the trot up in front of the crowds, people used to love him because he would be head high, you'd be extended trot. But really it wasn't because he was proud, it was because he was quite scared of everything. Well, nervous, things around him, worried that the crowds were going to clap any minute. And that made him so magnificent to look at. So anyway, but it got to him in the show jumping phase. He would be so, you could tell, the fences were nothing to him because he had a lot of scope. He could jump a big fence quite easily, but his mind was always slightly distracted, with the crowds, if photographers were a bit hiding, in the show jumping ring taking pictures. He'd be, you could tell he wasn't just coming to a fence, looking at it and jumping it. And as I say, I'm sure my riding was pretty not very helpful either. But saying that, he jumped a lot of clear rounds at the Quiet One Day events. I mean, he was, he jumped many clear rounds. I mean, he's one of the highest points winning horses of all time. So he did have a lot of success at the One Day events, at the, did we have CICs in those days? But anyway, the, advanced, good advanced events in GATCA, the British Open Championships, because there weren't so many crowds. It was the major 3-day events. I expect also because he galloped across country the day before, and yeah, it was there. It was very difficult to get to. Well, he didn't jump clear round, I don't think. I think I'm right in saying, he had, did have a number of 3-day events where he had many fences down on the last day. So,
can I ask though, because whenever I used to watch you growing up, and I'm sure one of the things that, as we said at the start of the show, has made you so popular was that even when things hadn't gone to plan, there would be a smile on your face and a pat on your horse's neck as you came out of an arena, even if, you'd lost a 5-star or there was heartbreak. Was that something that sort of came naturally to you, or was it something that because I think that's something that actually a lot of people could learn from, and something that I think should stick with people as well.
No, yeah, thank you. But I mean, it's thanks to my mother, really. She was always, when I was doing my pony club thing, she always used to say, Mary, you must smile. Whatever happens, you must smile. Come out of the ring and smile. She said, it'll help you feel better. And it's just, it'll help you put the mistake behind you and all this sort of thing. So it was her who made me and would tell me off if I didn't smile, sort of thing. So it became sort of, in a way, it became, I suppose, habit to do it, but also, it's true, if you, things go wrong and, if you can, you feel like just crying your eyes out, or, and if you smile, it makes things not seem so bad and make you realize, actually, okay, all that's happened is awful. But, think ahead, think of, smile, be positive, work out what you could do better for it not to happen. And just also realize, we're just so lucky to be doing this in our lives. Think of the people being in these war-torn zones or starving in Ethiopia, or, here we are prancing around on horses. So, appreciate what we're doing, even if it does go wrong.
Mary, I'd love you to talk about Star Appeal, because he was a terrifically successful horse who perhaps doesn't get as much credit these days for the level of success he achieved. Do you feel that at all?
Yes, he's one of the few horses that won both Badminton and Burghley back to back. There's very few have done that. And yeah, he followed on from King William. He wasn't as beautiful, King William was a sort of beautiful horse. Star Appeal was actually without, strict, as in, no tack on standing there. He was quite as unusual looking horse, a big Irish horse with a big head, not a lot of top line, but strong. But he was a really good performer. If I think, look back at his record, he was quite exceptional, how he'd always try his hardest. That's what, he tried his hardest at all the events he did. And that's why he had so much success, because he wasn't as elegant or as beautiful moving as a lot of horses, but he would go in and do a dressage test. Absolutely. You could be so accurate on him and sort of correct, and that's how he would earn his marks. He was a clean show jumping horse. He was a good boy, and he was brave and a very strong horse for the long format 3-day events. He'd gallop around and still come to an end and feel like he'd go around a second time. So that was, lovely to have a horse like that.
Because as well as his Badminton and Burghley victories, he also won Punchestown, took you to the Olympics, took you to Sydney, which must have been, quite an experience.
That's
but
right,
of all
yeah.
your Olympic performances, Mary, which, does London mean the most to you because it was the home Olympics, or is that slightly sentimental to say that?
Yeah, no, it's because I've been lucky to have been to 6 Olympic Games. I can't really believe it, even now. But through the Olympics, they were all. Barcelona was so special because it was the first. Atlanta was a bit disappointing. Sydney was wonderful. I thought nothing would beat Sydney because of the excitement of travelling to the other side of the world with the horses, the tremendous welcome we got from the Australian people. They were just seemed to be, so appreciative of everybody being there and the way they are such a sporting nation and the great climate for sport out there. And they did it really well. So that was such a special Olympics. And then, I did, when I first heard that London had won the bid, part of me was excited because I had Imperial Cavalier and King's Temptress, who were both at the fairly, top level of their game. And I thought, home Olympics, how exciting, a chance of riding. But I thought, but it's not going to be half as exciting, driving 3 hours in my lorry to the Olympic Games. So I went to London thinking it wouldn't be, great to compete at home games, but, not to expect too much. But I can honestly say now, having done London and, the tremendous support we got from our nation, just the whole thing of London, it has been the best.
That noise that followed, particularly the British riders, as they went round the cross-country course, just echoing round the park. You must have felt popular then.
I know, but that's actually one thing that we nearly made a mistake. You try and obviously leave no stone unturned, try and cover every thing that might go wrong, and all that sort of thing. But what I don't think we had, well, I hadn't appreciated, and we hadn't as a team, that I couldn't hear my stopwatch beeping at each minute because of the crowd, the cheers, the roar from the crowd as you were galloping around. It was like a sort of Mexican wave, as in it was still, as you were galloping, you could hear it, it was going with you all the way around the course. And I remember coming to minute 1, galloping along and thinking, shoot, I can't hear my stopwatch. And at my age, I couldn't really see it either. I needed to put the specs on really to look at it if I was galloping along. So I couldn't. So that was quite scary in a way that I thought, gosh, here I am at, such an important event. And I don't know if I'm going the right speed. It's nice to know where you are at the minute markers and check that you are on time and all that sort of thing. But as it turned out, I was held anyway. A rider ahead of me had a fall, and I was held for a while. So in fact, my time was gone a bit up the creek anyway. So that was, yes, it worked out all right in the end. But yeah, that was a bit nerve-wracking.
I can imagine. If we sort of go back slightly, you broke your neck in 2001, and from then you then went on to the Olympics in Athens 2004, Hong Kong in 2008, London, as we've just said. At any point did you think, do you know what, I'm not sure I want to do this anymore? Or were you very much set on continuing your eventing career?
I was totally set on continuing. Luckily, it all healed. I had to have it operated on, but and I did wonder if that was going to be the end of my career when I was lying in my hospital bed the next day waiting for the surgeon to come and see me. I was thinking, I wonder what he's going to say about eventing in the future. And then luckily he knew who I was, and he followed eventing. And he was the one, he said, well, I said, what about eventing in the future? And he said, well, how many times have you fallen off over the years? And I said, hundreds and hundreds of scars. And he said, have you ever hurt your neck before? And I said, well, no. And he said, well, there you go. He said, it's so unlikely you'll have that same fall again. So he said, if you want to compete, he said, don't ride for 8 weeks and don't fall off for 10 weeks. So I thought, good for him, to say that. And yeah, he's followed me after that. And also I think once it was all mended, it, didn't affect me at all. I was maybe a little bit stiffer, but not too bad. But in fact, it's come back to haunt me a bit now. That's why I'm not eventing so much now, because I have neck trouble, which is a little bit stems back to that. But anyway, yeah, at the time, no, it didn't put me off at all.
No, and certainly the success continued. Kentucky in 2011, it was, with King's Temptress, was extra special because Tess, as she was known, was a homebred. How much did it mean? Because you had been sort of involved in the breeding side of things for a little while, but to win a 5-star on a horse that you'd bred yourself, what did that mean to you?
Oh gosh, yes, it was very special. I was very sort of fortunate with the breeding, how it all just sort of, the first 2 horses first 3 as it was, then Tess was the third, but the first 2, King's Fancy and then King's Gem with Gemma Tattersall's, they both got to 5-star level. And then I kept the third one I bred was Tess, and had an owner come on board when she was intermediate level, and he bought her, but with the guarantee that I would keep the ride on her. So that's how I managed to keep her in the yard, because I very much, made a pact that I must sell these homebred horses, as much as I would have loved to have keep riding them. But we were building a house at the time. We needed the money, and I needed to make the whole business work. So, but anyway, then with Tess, I was able to keep riding her. And yeah, it was quite amazing to have bred. My first 3 I bred all got up to the 5-star level. But yes, to win Kentucky, I took 2 horses out there. The other one was Fern Hill Urco, who is owned by Sue and Eddie and Sue Davis and Jeanette Chin, who were the people who owned the Cavalier horses. And he was a lovely grey horse that they owned. Anyway, and they in King's Temperature, she wasn't incredibly talented, but she had a big heart, and she learned to trust me, and that's why she had so much success, because she was nice on the flat, but being fair, she was very obedient and well behaved, but she wasn't an amazing dressage horse. And she was brave across country, but very just trusted me to do it because her technique wasn't great. And again, show jumping, she just sort of learned she was hopeless as a novice horse jumping. She, jumped a bit head high. She just wasn't very good at it, and she learned gradually how to get more air. And when it came to the crunch, she did jump clear rounds, which was always fascinated me, how she'd come up and let them out of a bag, which wasn't that good at it, really. So to win and being there in Kentucky, I was first with her and second with her, so first and second was incredible. But to win on the homebred, and also the fact that it was the first time that a mare had ever won Roulette, run Kentucky, and let alone a rider breeder, on the homebred and all that. So it was all lovely, very exciting times.
On the subject of breeding, Mary, obviously you've also bred a top-class event rider as well as event horses. What's it been like to compete alongside Emily and, watch her career, be involved in her career, have to stand back from her career because people have to make, their own mistakes? What's that been like?
Yeah, well, I feel very lucky to have Emily, she always wanted to ride from a little young thing. I never persuaded her, but she always wanted to come up to the yard with me, and was always building jumps in the garden to jump around on foot. And it was just in her to do it. There was no persuasion from me at all. And then she's always wanted to be better. I always want to be better than you, Mummy, she used to say. So she's trying. She's getting on pretty well. And, if I think, gosh, she's still only 24. And if I think where I was at that stage, she's way more knowledgeable than I was at that age. And she's had some, big ups and downs. She's had some heavy falls, but has bounced back from them and still wanted to do it, which I think that's quite a big thing when you're young, and great if everything's going well, but it's once you have a couple of heavy falls and hurt yourself properly, then you start to switch off and you don't want to do it. But she seems to still want to do it, and so she's desperate to get to badminton and have success. She has ridden there twice, but has had a fall both times. But that just in a way makes her more hungry to want to go back and try and do it properly. So good luck to her. But it's so you never know, ups and downs. But she knows, she's followed me all, while she was growing up. She's seen the highs and lows, and you've got to be philosophical about the whole sport as well. But just keep striving to succeed.
Do you get nervous?
Watching her, I do get a bit butterfly-y, a little bit like I would if I was competing myself, but not. I would still be more. It's not nervous. I'm not nervous. It's more the anxiety of making a mistake. That's the worry.
Yeah.
I think you're not nervous, because if you were really nervous and scared, you wouldn't do it, presumably. And with Emily, it's more, I get butterflies for her, thinking, I hope she manages to ride, well, and do it properly to help her horse, and every situation. So that's, for me, the same a little bit as when I'm riding myself. But no, I would get more butterflies when I do it myself than when I watch Emily.
It's not a bad thing. You've got a long time to be watching her at top level, I think. How about yourself? You mentioned that obviously your neck has played up a little bit in recent years, but you have also been, still competing at high level. You were at 4-star last year with King Robert, who I think, is he a homebred?
Yes, he is. In fact, all I ride now are homebred ones. So, mind you, I've one of the 5. I've got 2 5-year-olds. One is an Irish horse, but the rest are all homebred ones. So yes, King Robert, he's a Tess, mummy, and Chili morning father. He had a twin brother, Tess double ovulated, and I got 2 embryos for the price of 1 because he was he grew up in a mother's tummy, but his brother was different from him, and not as quick thinking. Not that Bobby's incredibly quick thinking. He's having to work hard to do it. Anyway, so a friend has bought Joey King Finger, he called him. Anyway, but I've kept Bobby. I keep thinking, I should maybe sell him, but I enjoy riding him. He's quite, safe and, he knows me inside out, but he's such a sweetheart, but a little bit too quiet at times. But anyway, he's gone on and, got up to 4-star level, and I still have got this ridiculous dream. I would still love to ride once more at the top level. In fact, the complete dream would be to ride with Emily at Badminton, and for mother and daughter, because I think I'm right in saying no mother and daughter have ridden together at 5-star level at the same event, as long as I beat her, that is.
Yes, absolutely. That bit goes without saying. Mary, thank you so much, because honestly, we could sit and quiz you on the life and times of Mary King for many, many, many hours. And I'm sure our listeners would love to listen, but we have absolutely loved looking back on some of the highlights of your career. So thank you very much for sharing them with us.
That's okay. It's lovely to do so. Thank you.
Catherine, thank you as always. I have thoroughly enjoyed this one.
So have I. It's been great fun. I thought I knew quite a lot about Mary King, but I've learned quite a lot as well. So yeah.
Oh, there's a lot more you don't know.
We'll save it for another show. Mary, thank you very, very much, and welcome to the Echo Ratings Hall of Fame. Listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this very special episode, and we'll be back very soon. But in the meantime, don't forget, get in touch with us at Echo Ratings, at Eventing Podcast. We would love to hear from you, and tag us when you listen across social media as well. For now, that is all we've got time for. A huge thank you to Mary for her time, and we'll be back very soon. Thank you for listening to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast. This podcast is available for free on iTunes, Spotify, Podcast Addict, or wherever you usually listen to your podcasts. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. Find us at eventingpodcast.com or search Eventing Podcast on social media.